Good afternoon and welcome to the Supplier Development Programme's Helping You Bid Better live Q&A panel with our expert trainers. I am Gillian Cameron, Programme Manager for the Supplier Development Programme, and I hope you have taken the opportunity today to visit a range of virtual stands and network through our meeting hubs with today's delegates. If you're new to SDP, we are a business initiative supported by Scottish local authorities and Scottish Government and a range of other bodies. The aim of the programme is to ensure that Scottish SMEs and third sector organisations have access to free procurement advice and training to assist them find, win and keep government contracts. We are delighted that we can now advance the rollout of our free tender training services to work with Aberdeen City, Shire and Highland Councils, ensuring that no matter where an SME is based in Scotland, they can fully access our programme. Last year, more than 1,800 suppliers attended 120 SDP supplier training events. And of those that responded to our feedback surveys, 88% of suppliers said they were more likely to bid for future public contracts as a direct result of the training they received. There is a reason that the number one question from buyers to suppliers is, are you registered on Public Contract Scotland? This is because it's the main portal for everything to do with advertising upcoming contract opportunities. And if you're not registered on it, or you haven't updated and published your supplier finder profile, you will be missing out on business opportunities. But don't despair with that. SDP provides a vital link to keep the public sector connected to businesses in an open and transparent way. And we have invested in this event technology to ensure that we can continue to facilitate this crucial link in these challenging COVID-19 times. Today's event is just one of many Meet the Buyer virtual type events that we hope to run in the future in partnership with our local authority members. By facilitating these connections and promoting contract opportunities, SDP will help businesses like yours bid better and increase your chances of submitting a winning tender. The SDP's team of trainers have an amazing depth and breadth of experience in the public procurement and tendering world. And during our training sessions, they often share their experience on what good bids, and indeed some not so good bids, look like. And we are delighted to offer you access to this experience today. Remember, these trainers were once in your shoes when they decided to bid for SDP's training framework, and they were successful. So get your burning questions about tendering, writing a bid, what is a community benefit, or indeed how to best engage with public sector buyers ready, as our panel of tendering experts introduce themselves to you.
Well, good afternoon everyone. I'd now like to introduce our panel of expert speakers. Can we start off with Kenny Govan? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, I'm Kenny Govan. I'm Senior Procurement Officer of Strathclyde Partnership for Transport.
Thank you. Julie, are you online? Can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, yeah, my name's Julie Caughey of Caughey Solutions Limited. I'm one of SDP's trainers.
Okay, and John, are you online there?
Yes, I can't see you, but I can see me. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Connor. I run a small company called JM Management Limited, and I'm one of the SDP training panel.
And Owen.
Hi there, yeah, good afternoon, folks. My background is I was a buyer in the public sector for many years with organisations such as Strathclyde Regional Council, which makes me feel really old because it was wound up in 1996. The Authorities Buying Consortium and latterly Scotland Excel. I switched roles in 2011 to work as a supplier within 10 business development, and our focus now is working on one-to-one basis with suppliers bidding in, and also with the Supplier Development Programme as one of their trainers.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we have our first question in today, which is from Brian Owen, who is asking, as a UK-wide company not based in Scotland, how would they properly input social benefits that are seen to support a local framework or tender? Julie, would you like to lead on that question?
Oh, I can see everyone now. Would you mind repeating that for me, Gillian?
Yes. So I have a question about a UK-wide company that are not based in Scotland. How would they input social benefits into a contract for a local framework? So how would they carry them out?
Yes, well, they would have to normally do something that is local to whoever the contract's for. So they would have to make arrangements for that. That would be part of their bid. It's usually not sufficient to do social value in the area that the company is based in. It's got to be in the area where the service is actually being delivered to or for. So it depends what they want to do. If they want to have work experience, then they will have to set something up locally. Same with school talks and taking on apprentices and things like that. It is very much geared towards activity happening in the local area.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Kenny, would you like to put a comment on that from the buy side for us?
I just agree completely with Julie here. When you put a tender out, the community benefits and the social aspects of it, you normally ask them to be directly related to the award of the contract. So if the contract is based in, let's say, Glasgow, where I work, then you would expect the benefits to be delivered in Glasgow. So regardless of where the bidder is, I agree with Julie, you have to have them delivered in the local area to the tender.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Brian, I hope that answers your question. We've got another question in here about if you're a sole trader, how easy is it for you to get involved in public sector tendering? Owen, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, it's quite a relevant question, Gillian, because some of the suppliers that I work with are actually sole traders. And I think the way a lot of the tenders are structured now, you know, they're maybe split into lots, kind of product-wise, service-wise, geographical-wise. So they shouldn't discriminate against sole traders, but it's always a case, I think, of getting through the process. I think many sole traders are kind of intimidated by the initial questions and what to be done. But it's very much a kind of selling job, and I think it's just sitting down, going through the process, really kind of promoting exactly what you can offer, what you can bid. And I think there are opportunities, I've seen it for sole traders to win business. We've got one or two here as it is, so that kind of just shows that it can be.
I think that highlights that, you know, yourselves as trainers, as individual organisations, that you're still managing to work in the public sector as well. John, would you like to answer anything further on that?
Well, 96% of businesses in the UK are micro SMEs or sole traders. So there's an awful lot of people out there who are winning work on a daily basis from the public sector. So, you know, don't be put off by the fact you're a sole trader. If you think you've got the capability to do it, and you're big enough to take on the actual task, then go for it. Because, you know, people are winning that business right now who are as good or at the same size as you are.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Right, the next question we have in is, if a tender doesn't mention community benefits, can we or should we include this in our response? Back to Julie, would you like to answer that one?
Well, I mean, one of the sort of number one things is that you have to answer the questions put before you. So you don't really get the opportunity to put extra things in. However, if you have answered the question in its entirety and you've still got space left, you might want to introduce some elements of what you might be able to do on community benefits. A community benefits question is mandatory now for any tenders that are over £4 million. So if it's tenders along that sort of value, then you will definitely have a community benefits question. They come in all sorts of guises, though. They can literally be a tick box. You know, will you provide community benefits if you win this tender? Yes or no. Or they can be, you know, a sort of 2 or 3 page answer that's required. So it does vary from tender to tender. But if there isn't actually a question on community benefits, then you might want to, because obviously it's like the bigger sort of corporate social responsibility, if there was a question on environment or anything like that, anywhere where you thought there was an element of relevance, then you could bring it in. You've just got to remember that you must use the space that's available to directly answer the question that's in front of you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Kenny, from your point of view, do you have like a pick list of community benefits, or is there something in particular you're looking for in your contracts?
We do both, and there's a lot of councils as well do both, and they have a pick list of community benefits with points that can be attributed to each one, but you also have the facility to state within your tender that you would want X, Y, and Z community benefits delivered, and you would state upfront what those are. So you can be as definitive as that, or you can just leave it as free as having a general, here's what community benefits are, and you propose whatever community benefits you would want to deliver as part of that, and give the bidder free rein over that. So you'll potentially see tenders going out in multiple different ways with community benefits. There is no one set way of doing it.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. We seem to be having a theme here around community benefits, and the next question is asking whether our community benefits must be additional to the main purpose of the contract. Does anyone like to comment on that one? Maybe Owen?
In terms of additional to the main purpose of the contract, you always think it should be a kind of aligned to the purpose of the contract, Gillian, but I think from what I've seen, it's not really consistent across the piece. So certainly for kind of sole traders, and Julie touched on it earlier, it may be things like pupil work placements. Now you could say that's not totally aligned to the purpose of the contract, but it is still a community benefit in terms of kind of training. So other parts of it, I've seen some construction contracts where you maybe have to build part of a community centre while you're also building a new school or something. So that could be aligned to part of the main contract. So I'm not sure if there's a kind of one size fits all with these things for what I've seen.
Okay, and what about if your business is actually delivering something that really is a community benefit as part of the service? Do they need to have an additional community benefit to that?
Well, a lot of the kind of social enterprise groups, as you say, are a community benefit in themselves. So I think it's kind of hard for them to say on top of what we're already doing, we will do X, Y, Z. But there could be other facets in terms of, say, pupil work placements or training. They could be doing something in addition to the kind of main core of what the contract's actually about.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Can I just come in there, Gillian?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So again, just to echo what Owen was saying there, but I think there usually does have to be some level of additionality to community benefits over and above what the contract, the main purpose of the contract, but it does have to be relevant and it does have to be proportionate. So you can't have a £2,000 contract and they're expecting you to do 6 weeks of work experience for 5 people or something like that, So the proportionality comes in. And I think if anybody listening to this finds it, they feel it's disproportionate, then they have got a case to go back to the buyer and express that concern about what they're asking for on the community benefits side.
Okay, thank you. All very valid points there, Julie. John, were you wanting to add something to that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that come out of this in terms of where community benefits haven't been asked for. One of the things you should always try and do in your tender is deliver additional value, added value without added cost. And if you don't get asked about community benefits, then putting those in could be part of that added value. Fully understand and fully endorse what Julie says. There's got to be proportionality and relevance to everything that you're asked to do in any tender. And let's face it, in addition to delivering the main event, everybody needs to make a profit out of this, otherwise it's not sustainable.
Indeed, that's true. Okay, thank you for the answers on that. Next question I have here is from Moise Nabal, and they're asking, oh, it's just jumped off the screen.
It's gone. Oh, yeah, still there.
Hang on. There we go. Back again. How can a newly formed company apply for a contract successfully when many tender requirements ask for 2 years of turnover, and you might only have been going for a few months? Owen, would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I think on the kind of ESPD form, the European Single Procurement Document form, it does say for new companies that you can supply additional information. And I would hope that procurement guys would maybe look for something like a bank reference or some kind of business development plan or something that they would look at, so they don't just discriminate in the fact that, you know, you've just really kind of started out. You certainly shouldn't be doing that. So I think there is a bit of latitude to present some kind of evidence of information that you're financially sound and capable.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, please.
So, sorry, Gillian, I was lost there. Can you repeat the question for me?
They were asking about if they were a new start company, how would they bid for contracts if they can't have the referenceability of maybe 2 years worth of accounts?
Right. Sorry, John, on you go.
Okay, I have a case in point where I assisted a company that didn't exist when the contract notice was put out. They were intended to go for this as 3 sole traders working together, and I advised them that the first thing they should do is form a limited company, which they did. They then won a contract, so they were actually in existence for something like 4 months before the contract started, and that was done on the basis of decent financial projections of what they were going to do, and if they had won the contract, that was going to be fulfilled pretty much in the first 12 months. And it was to do with psychologists delivering counselling in schools in Lanarkshire. And it was a very large contract. So in the end, I think what they won was worth about £200,000 a year. So it can be done.
Okay. Kenny, you wanted to add to that?
So definitely with financials, it's another one of these things that the buyer has to be proportionate to the tender itself and proportionate to the risk of the tender and not just the value. So you can have a supply contract with many players in the market, and with financials, the question asked is, should you really be asking for financials? Because there's more risk to the buyer if the company was to enter administration, because there's another 10 people who can do it for them. Should the reason there is guidance from the Scottish Government a few years ago that said, you know, be going out without any financials being asked at all, which is an option for you, asking for 5 tender, and that's not really relevant. It's definitely a question you can go back to a buyer with.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Okay, let's move on. Gareth Turpin is asking, what does best practice look like in terms of writing a compelling bid? John, would you like to take that one?
Well, first of all, you have to answer all the questions. And before you can really do that, you have to understand what the question is about. So if there's anything that you read in a tender that you're not totally clear on in terms of how you're going to answer it, then go back and ask for clarification as to what the question is. So it's about answering the question, answering all the questions, answering it fully, making sure you've not missed anything out, and telling the strongest possible story of how you're going to deliver against any particular contract. And it's all about earning points for quality and earning points on price.
Julie, would you like to add anything to that?
Sorry, I got distracted there. About writing a compelling bid. I was watching about Kenny trying to get his connection better. A compelling bid of lots of tips, I suppose. Like just adding to what John said, you've got to answer the question, but I think as well, before you even start, you need to think about what your strategy is for when you're writing the bid. So what are your key selling points about your organisation and about what you can do on that bid? And you have to And I always write those down, and don't go for more than three, 4 or 5. But what are your key strengths as a company, and what are your key strengths in delivering this contract? And then make sure you work those in to your response. So even though you do have to answer the question, it's a bit like a politician who don't always directly answer the question. They say what they want to get across. So there's got to be a bit of both. You have to answer the question, but get across the main points that you want to say about your organisation. And sometimes organisations do find that hard because they only know about themselves. And so therefore having a third party involved sometimes does help, because that's one of the first things that I ask my clients is, okay, what's so good about you, what makes you different from any other company that's going to be bidding from this, and let's make sure, and they kind of like scratch their heads sometimes and have to really think about that, and then that's what we will use as our sort of compelling nature when we're answering the bid. The other tip is to make sure that you use language that is really strong and committed. So not we may do this, or we might, or if this happens then we might do that, but we will do this, and that sort of committed language just comes across a lot stronger in the bid.
That's great, thank you, Julie. Of course, the Supplier Development Programme have a little procurement guide with the Energy Savings Trust, which can be downloaded from our website. There's a couple of exercises in there that ask things about that, helps you start to shape what you think your value proposition is. So I'd recommend people who are listening to this that maybe that's an opportunity to go and download that guide and have a think about it in advance. Okay, I've got another question here which I think is really relevant. It's from Chris Lewis, and he's asking, would the panel have any tips to improve the quality section of a bid? Owen, would you like to pick that one up?
I think one of the main things I found, Gillian, is just really kind of following on some of the points that John and Julie are making there. I mean, first of all, make sure you fully read the statement of requirements so you know what's actually wanted. And the second part that I've found, and it was quite a surprise really when I came over to working on the supplier side, is basically how little information sometimes suppliers provide in their bid. These things are a real kind of sales job, so you want to capture every little point or fraction of point that you can. And it's amazing sometimes, and some of the procurement questions now, and Kenny, I'm sure, Kenny, you don't do this, but some of these questions I see in the quality section have about 10 different parts to them. And it can be really difficult unless you actually break down each part of the question to make sure you answer it, because you're not going to score the full quality points unless you've answered all the questions. So kind of breaking each bit down, make sure you read the statement requirements, and then a bit like Julie says, then putting forward why you best fit what they're looking for. And don't be shy any way down the line, really.
Okay, thank you for that one. Right, Kenny, I think this might be one for you. Neil McGregor's asking, are local authorities more likely to engage with larger firms? Now, Kenny, I know your background was working with the councils. What's your answer on that one?
No, not really. Any buyer in a local authority wouldn't really care, to be honest, what size of the firm is that they're dealing with. All they're really interested in who can give them a decent quality service for a decent price, regardless of the size of the firm. When you're evaluating a tender, you don't look at them and say, oh, they're a big player, we'll give them more points. You can't do that. So the bid is the bid, and you evaluate the bid and you evaluate what's in front of you, and your award is made to the best company with the best submission and hopefully the lowest price. So the size of the company is completely irrelevant to it. But can I add something to what the panel members here have said about the bids? And in terms of the quality and the submissions, we, and I always have done, a less is more approach on bidders, and say to them, just read the question, answer the question, try not to embellish, because people just won't read it. So if you submit 15 pages, people will just lose interest in it. So just read the question and answer the question. Less is more is very much the order of the day on this. And I've always stuck with, if you can't get to the bottom of a tender submission in any more than 5 questions, you're doing something wrong. So you shouldn't really, a buyer shouldn't be asking screeds and screeds of questions to get to the bottom of, can they actually do this? So if I was to give any sort of, advice to a bidder, just stick to answering the question, but please do read the question as well and cover all the points, but don't go on and don't put market material in, because they'll just ignore it.
Okay. Does anyone want to add to that?
I will,
Okay.
yeah. I would say, Kenny, I wish all buyers were like that, because we're seeing like 13, 14, 15 quality questions with parts A, B, C, D, and E. 2 pages per question. So definitely not less is more as far as they're concerned, and as more is more. You have to fill up the page. If they're asking for 2 pages, you have to.
I don't have time to evaluate that. Never mind write it.
I know. Yeah. That's just what we're seeing quite a lot.
Yeah. I totally agree, Julie. I had one recently with 26 questions, and I had another one who actually asked for 10 pages of A4 to outline your supply chain. So it's, and you can imagine the time and effort that it takes you to sit down and start to write something like that. So, yeah, I mean, keep preaching that message, Kenny, is all I can say. Get that over to your colleagues would be great.
Well, it's not just
Maybe we need to have a conversation with Phil here.
It's not just the public sector that might go over the top that way. Sorry, I did one.
Can I just go back to the thing about small companies? Oh,
certainly.
I was just going back to the question about small companies. Was that I think it's actually often the reverse. Certainly, when I was corporate procurement manager at East Lothian Council, what we found as quite a small council was the small suppliers did better for us because it was a better match. And quite often small suppliers will go the extra mile, and especially if they're owner managed, is really passionate about what they do, and they're going to do a good job for you because it's their reputation that's on the line. So sometimes, I know you can't evaluate on small, medium or large at all, and you don't, but sometimes you can just tell from the bid that it's written by a smaller company because they've got that much more passion. It's less, I would say, tender blurb and more genuine about what they're actually going to do for you in the bid. Sorry, John.
Okay, thank you very much for that. John, do you want to add something to that?
Well, it's not just the public sector that can go over the top on quality. I did one last year where the input on how you were going to integrate with this private building company's supply chain was 29 pages, which was way over the top.
Yeah.
Okay, so what sort of routes are there for suppliers to go back if they receive a tender that has what would seem quite onerous things in that? Would you recommend that they go back to the buyer on that?
Absolutely, every time. Yeah, I think anything that needs clarification, you should go back to the buyer. Sorry, Julie.
I mean, I think it's difficult to affect. I think they're unlikely to withdraw any questions, unless you could say that they're completely irrelevant. I think they'll probably stick with what they've got in the tender document. And it is quite difficult because obviously you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. You can't make a fuss about, how many questions have been asked. So I think you just have to sort of, yes, as John says, if there's anything you don't understand, then you can ask a question. But I mean, I think we could all tell war stories of horrific questions that we've seen and had to reply to. And it's just sort of par for the course sometimes.
Perhaps that's something that STB can look into, working with you guys and seeing is there's some sort of education that could maybe help and highlight some of the areas where it seems to be. I mean, from what you've all been saying, it sounds like construction, or the area around construction seems to be quite onerous, the ones you've mentioned. Okay, let's go
IT
back
tenders
to
are-
our questions and see what's come in. Sorry, Kenny?
IT tenders are the worst.
You think so? Why is
You
that?
you can get 50 to 100 questions in an IT tender very, very easily.
Here, a terrible buzzing noise. I don't know if anyone else can hear that, but hopefully it's gone away now. I suppose that's a good point. Somebody had asked a question earlier about, you know, procurement people being specialists in particular areas. So how do the tenders get evaluated where maybe there's something that's really technical? Do they bring in specialists, or is it the category managers, or who is it that evaluates tenders when it's in a specialist area? I mean, I suppose probably between Kenny and Julie, you're best placed to maybe answer that.
Procurement don't evaluate, full stop. We are not technical experts in anything except procurement. So the evaluation is carried out by a panel of subject experts. Procurement is only there to moderate, to ensure that the scoring given is consistent and in line with the evaluation criteria in the tender. We absolutely do not score.
Okay, and you know, within, obviously there's been a lot of cuts and resources within perhaps local authority, within public bodies. Is that something that they would bring in experts to look at, to review the tenders, that maybe understand if it's a particular, maybe in the technical field, for instance, where there might be a specialism?
Potentially you can use a consultant, as long as the consultant obviously has no conflict of interest in it. You can bring in external help for it. That's perfectly fine to do that.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Did you want something from me there, Gillian?
Yes, that would be lovely if you can add something into that.
Yeah. Just echo what Kenny says, is that you are relying on usually service areas to evaluate. There will be at least 2, if not 3 people, hopefully evaluating each question. So there is the opportunity, if there is some, if there's sort of some discord between the scores, then that will get flushed out when you look at them together, and there's a consensus meeting usually to talk about any differences in scores. It does end up being, fair and transparent. At East Lothian Council, we did occasionally use consultants. One that springs to mind was we were doing 3G pitches, and it's very technical. So we did need a consultant there to help us to score the tenders that were coming back for that. So yeah, on occasions they do have to bring in help.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Julie. Okay, I have another question here from Frain Alajaber, and they're asking, should we bid at all if we don't meet the insurance money amount? I'm only asking this question because we're fully capable to fulfil all aspects of the tender except that we are a small company to achieve some of the monetary demands. Owen, would you maybe like to pick that one up?
Yeah, it's if they don't think that these insurance requirements are relevant, they could certainly post a question in and ask. If they are relevant, the tenders now at least give you the opportunity to say, if you win the contract, will you commit to having the appropriate insurance levels in place by the time the contract commences? So if they know that they're going to get whatever amount of business out of it, then it might be better to say, yeah, we don't have that insurance just now, but we'll take the extra premiums if we win the contract. But as I say, if they don't think they're relevant, then they could certainly question them through the Q&A session. I have done that in the past, and actually have had insurance levels reduced. The buyer had copied them over from a previous tender, so they weren't as relevant. So, these things are worth clarifying just to see.
Okay, thank you. Stephen McGuire has asked, he's an ICT company, and he's saying some of the buyers ask for 3 references from other public sector bodies. If we don't have public sector bodies as a reference, is there any scope to reference other private sector work we may have done. John, would you like to answer that one?
Well, first of all, you can't insist on it being public sector buyers that you have worked for in the past. If you want somebody to do cleaning in a medical facility, for instance, you can't insist on it being an NHS hospital. It just has to be in a clinical environment. So in all circumstances, it doesn't have to be public sector. Public sector previous experience is probably beneficial, but it has to be of the same scope and scale as to what's being asked for under the contract, but you can't insist on it being public sector.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else like to add to that one?
No, I think just to agree with John, I think the ESP document itself actually says from public or private sector experience. So I think it actually is in the documentation itself, Gillian. So they shouldn't be asking specifically for public sector only, as long as it's relative, as John says, and relevant.
Okay, thank you. Craig Davison has asked, lowest price was mentioned a couple of times. Would you recommend in a bid that a supplier gives a lot of attention to look at their costs and where they can be reduced, or spending time promoting the value they bring to the table in terms of quality, experience and track record? Which has the most weight, low cost or value proposition? Any takers for that question?
I'll take it. It should be outlined in the contract notice what the relevant proportions are.
Yeah.
We talk in some of the training courses we've done for SDP about there being a glass ceiling. If you're a high quality delivery company, then don't go for something that's 80% price and 20% quality. But if you're the sports direct of the business, then that's the kind of contract you should be going after. So there will be a glass ceiling depending on where you sit in your industry. But you should always look at what the quality versus price ratio is on a contract. Bear in mind that they can no longer go for lowest price alone. There always will be a quality element to any evaluation that's undertaken these days. But clearly, if you're a high quality deliverer, then you won't necessarily want to go on something that's 20% price and 10% price.
I was going to say, Gillian, I think in that situation, if you think you're not going to be the lowest price, then you obviously want to maybe, and you want to go for the contract, then do focus on your quality, because ultimately, unless, I mean, I have seen a 90% price, 10% quality recently, but it probably wouldn't matter how good your quality was, unless you were in a bracket price-wise, you're not going to win it. But if it's a kind of 70-30 type thing, then yeah, focus on your quality, because you may not be the lowest in price, but if you get the highest in quality, that still might be enough to carry you through. It's not always the lowest price wins. You do see these tenders where it's the overall mix obviously takes you through. It's the most economically advantageous, as they always say. So it depends, as John says, what that kind of percentage criteria is to start with.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now we've got a question which is regarding qualification systems. So Evans Bolodis has asked about construction line, about CHAS and the various different accreditations that are out there, where they're required to answer the same questions over and over again. Could there not just be one system? And I suppose this is maybe a question to Kenny, for instance, because I know construction line and qualification systems have maybe been used in the past, but I don't know if there's so much appetite in the public sector to use them now, is there?
No, not particularly. There used to be quite a large store put on construction line or Achilles membership, and there was a lot of councils used to use them for drawing lists from. That's what they were created for. It was to create a restricted list that a council could then pick 5 companies for a tender from, and they would do that from construction line, which had a list generator function on it. There's much less of a call for that now. I think there's probably some councils still use it for that, but a lot of these pre-qualification systems are expensive, and you're taking a bit of a punt on it as to what one an individual buyer will use. You might end up having to register with half a dozen. The ESPD is specifically designed to try and do away with that, though. and have a lot of the pre-qualification embedded in the ESPD. So if a buyer's using an ESPD, you shouldn't actually need to be on construction line or whatever. But you will have buyers for sub-threshold contracts, so sub £2 million works contracts, might use construction line, Achilles, etc. as a list, and they're perfectly allowed to use that as a list, and they'll draw down companies from that. But larger contracts, no. But for smaller contracts, yes, they might still do it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's got moral issues, but it doesn't have legal issues. You can do it.
Okay. Julie, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can remember the day where it's actually not long after I joined procurement that it stopped, where it was seen as a bit of a pre-qualification thing to be on construction line. I think one of the reasons it was stopped, well, two main reasons was, one, it wasn't fair to put suppliers through something that was going to cost them something to join just so they could bid effectively. And secondly, it didn't feel that actually there was any rigour to the process of getting in construction line. So it didn't really achieve any sort of pre-qualification in the end anyway. So it's much better if the organisation can do their own pre-qualification using the ESPD, or a simplified version of the ESPD if it's a lower value contract.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, we have another question here which is asking, if we were to bring in a new subcontractor during the term of the contract, should they complete the ESPD before going to do any work? Owen, would you like to answer that question?
Sorry, Gillian, you broke up just a wee bit there, so I missed the start of the question.
It's okay.
I heard subcontractors, I missed the first bit, sorry.
Okay, the first bit was if they were to bring in a new subcontractor during the term of the contract, should they complete the ESPD before doing any work for them?
I would have thought, first of all, they need to tell the procurement team, whoever it is, that they're going to bring in a new subcontractor, and ultimately the procurement guys may then ask that a new ESPD be completed, because the ESPD is obviously so the procurement people know who is carrying out work on their behalf. So they may well want that to have that information, just to make sure that the subcontractor is someone that they would want to have working on their contracts. So I would have thought, yeah, first of all, approach the procurement people, and then it's up to the procurement guys if they want that company to complete another ESPD.
Okay. Maybe ask Kenny then, if somebody approached you with that question, how would you handle that?
With pretty much any form of construction contract, be that JCT or NEC, the contractor is obliged to tell the council, the employer, which subcontractors they have on site. So any who haven't been declared as part of the tender, or if you want to switch subcontractors during the course of the works, you have to tell the buyer that, you have to tell the body that, and they may choose, they want to know who they are, but they may well want an ESPD run on it, and they'll tell you that if that's the case. So they'll ask for an ESPD submission, they'll evaluate that, and they'll tell you whether or not they're happy with that subcontractor. So you are obliged to tell them anyway under the terms of the contract, and they will then come back to you and tell you whether or not they want an ESPD run on it.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, Callum Trahan is asking, what would be best practice for introducing a new product to a client's tender? Julie, would you like to answer that one?
It's a really good question, actually, because
I suppose it's about innovation in a way. So you wanted to maybe introduce innovation into your bids. So how would you go about approaching that?
Well, hopefully the buyer will have asked a question on that. You know, if they've got, quite often you'll have a value added or innovation type question, which is the perfect opportunity, obviously. And to be honest, I mean, some of the clients I've worked with do struggle with that. They to think of something that might be innovative. But if there isn't a question like that, then I think you should try to introduce that into your bid. And you're just looking for the best question that best suits. So something like, it might be, because they don't actually often ask you to respond to the spec. They just assume that you're going to meet the spec. Or the statement of requirements, but there might be a question on method statement, so how you're going to go about delivering the contract, and that's when you could bring that in. So, for example, it could be that normally the process is very manual and that somebody turns up to check something every 15 minutes, whereas you could install cameras that does that, and that means that there's less labour involved, and therefore it's going to be more cost effective for the client. So I think that's what quite often there's something called variant bids, and that allows the bidder to put in something. They bid for what's asked for, and they can put in a variant bid to say, yes, we can do what you've asked for, but we can also do something that's a bit different and actually is probably going to be better and save you money. And that's a perfect opportunity. But if variant bids aren't allowed, then you must make sure that you do bid for what they're asking for, provide this opportunity for something extra. I have seen a really massive bid recently that got rejected because it was deemed non-compliant, and that was because they had put forward an innovative solution. And even if the buyer had wanted to choose that solution, they couldn't, because their tender had been for something slightly different. So it was kind of a lose-lose situation that bidder got rejected for that. So you do have to be really careful, make sure it is still a compliant bid, but put in the options of doing something different. And sometimes you get that opportunity actually before the tender comes out. So sometimes there'll be some pre-engagement, either through a PIN or an event where they'll sort of talk to suppliers, and that's your opportunity where you can, obviously ideally one-to-one without telling everybody about your great idea. It's just to say, look, there is another way of doing this, there's a new innovative way of doing this that we could help you with.
Yeah, and I think that just highlights maybe the importance of the events like today's Meet the Buyer, where you have an opportunity to come along and engage with the buyers and explain about your products and services, so that when they are considering what tenders they're going to be running and what should be in them, they are aware that there's maybe developments in the marketplace that can offer the innovation, that can offer maybe savings or other ways of delivering services. So this is a great opportunity for suppliers to start to engage and open up and explain some of their new products that may be coming to market around it. John, would you like to add anything else to that?
Well, I think in terms of innovative bids, that was how the first voice over internet protocol telephone systems were delivered to local authorities. They went out to buy a new telephone exchange, and a couple of bidders came back and said, there's a better, cheaper way of doing this. How many minutes do you burn in a year? How many handsets do you need on desks? And then they delivered a voice over IP, delivered the same end product, delivered the same outcome. So if somebody's written a tender that's based on outcomes, there's much more scope for you to come up with an innovative solution to deliver how that is going to be executed in the end.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Can I just add to what Julie was saying there, Gillian? I mean, I think it's really good if you can try and get in early. If you know that a tender is due up in the next whatever many months, try and get in and speak to the buyer beforehand to say there's another way of doing this. So, that might help shape their specification and their requirement before the tender actually comes out, because once it comes out, then it might be more difficult to change what they actually accept if that's not what was specified in the initial tender. Is that example Julie was outlining there. So, yeah, try and get in early and make the buyers aware, I think is certainly something to kind of follow through.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. I've got one of probably a few questions that are talking about the ESPD and about feedback. And this one, they're asking if in the open procedure, if the ESPD is deemed as failed, and the buyer then obviously won't read the rest of the tender, should the supplier still receive feedback on their ESPD submission? Kenny, would you like to pick that one up?
Yes, they should, is the short answer. If a bid's going to be dismissed for any reason, the buyer has to give the bidder comprehensive information and why their bid's been dismissed. They can't just say, yeah, your bid's not good enough. So it doesn't matter what stage, whether it's ESPD, whether it's at technical, whether it's commercial. If the bid's going to be dismissed, then the regulations state that that bidder has to be given sufficient reasons to explain why that decision has been made. So there's no excuse for not receiving a reason, and if you're not getting a reason, you should be asking for it.
Okay, thank you for that. And this one, I suppose, with your wealth of experience panel, is maybe a good one. The customer is asking, could you win a tender cold, i.e. with no relationship with the buyer first of all?
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably more than 80% of winning tenders are on that basis.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So there you go, even if you're a first time tenderer, and obviously the Supplier Development Programme is here to support you. If you've never done any tendering before, we have a range of courses that will help you understand what tendering is all about and all these different aspects that we've been talking about today, ESPD, and also talking about community benefits. I'd also just like to remind everyone that we have for this session a poll running, which is asking if, having heard some of the answers from our expert panel, if it's helped you understand a bit more about tendering, and does it encourage you to actually get involved and bid for public sector contracts. So if you can take the time today to answer that question, that would be most useful. And of course, we will be doing a survey after the event has finished, and we look forward to your feedback and how you found the session today. So I think we've got time for one more question. And I'm going to just have a look through our list here and see what's coming through. The ESPD has been talked about a lot today. Is there any top tips you have for filling that out? I know a lot of the answers are yes, no on there, but is there any top tips you would have for completing the ESPD? Maybe Owen, you could lead on that one.
Yeah, what I've seen various examples, and just going back to I suppose my kind of main lesson from today is don't sell yourself short. You know, when it asks you for a list of technical equipment, plant and tools, you know, give a list of your technical equipment, plant and tools and why that's relevant to the contract. I literally have seen, and I've said this one before for a roofing contract, and the guy had put 2 ladders in a van basically. You know, everybody's going to fill these, yes. You know, what points is that going to get you? So, you know, in terms of the information that you put forward, make sure in terms of if you've got qualifications, if you've got accreditations, if you've got brand new low emission type vehicles and it's a delivery type contract, you know, why are you a good fit to do that work? So don't sell yourself short, I think is the thing that I've seen too many times with this, or some assumptions. You know, we're the current contractor, so the buyer knows we've got all this. Well, it might be a different buyer who's actually evaluating it. So, yeah, let's get the detail on things in as you need to do with all of these tenders and ESPD documents when you're bidding.
I think that's a very valid point, Owen, that when tenders are being evaluated, it might be different people that are evaluating different questions. So you have to read and understand the question, not just say, well, I've answered that in the question a couple of pages back, because maybe that person might not see that answer. And also to treat it that they don't know your company, you have to start from fresh, explaining who you are and what you do, etc. John, do you want to add anything to that? Sorry,
Gillian, can I just add just yes. As a lesson learned, sorry, John. Yeah, there's a question there which is actually about the environmental sustainability and what are you going to deliver environmental wise when you're actually completing the contract. The amount of ESPDs I've seen where basically people just say, well, I've got an environmental policy and here it is. When you actually break down, that's not answering the question. So yeah, just read the questions carefully sometimes and you know, try what are they actually looking for here. I've got a policy that's not outlining the environmental benefits you're going to deliver when you undertake the contract. So sorry, John.
I'm just going to say that you need to answer what's in front of you and concentrate on that and make no assumptions. I've come across in the past a company that lost out on a £200,000 contract simply because they failed to answer questions and assumed that other people knew what they were all about.
Yeah.
Okay, Julie, have you
Can
got
I
any
just add
top
to that,
tips to
Gillian?
add to that? Yep.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot that can be done on the ESPD before the ESPD comes out, because it is more or less the same questions. I think that firms should be getting a tender library together. And that includes, the stuff that Owen talked about there, your equipment and your resources, etc. And ideally some pictures of them. You're not always allowed to use pictures, but you can have all your liveried vans and your picture of your warehouse or whatever it is. But also on the skills and qualifications and experience of management, just to have that ready for each person that you're likely to use. And of course you might adapt it depending on the tender that you're going for. But remember, the ESPD is about the whole company, and it's about the past. It's not about what you're going to do in this tender. It's actually selection sort of stages about the company and about the past. So it is something that you could at least have quite a lot of the content working on that. And get that ready so that you're not having to, and have a space in your computer where you've got your most recent insurances, your most recent accounts, etc. And keep that all in one place, and just so that it's really handy for you when you are doing the ESPD.
That's great top tips there. Thank you, Julie. Kenny, maybe as we start to wind up this session, what's maybe one of the most common mistakes you've seen when you've been evaluating tenders?
People don't read the tender is the main thing. There's a lot of companies just skip to the end, go to the price bit, fill that in, have a look at the quality submission at the last minute, and then put them in. 80% of the bids I see come in on the final day, and usually in the last half hour before the tender comes, the timescale is due. Basically because they think we can see it before it comes in, which we can't, because we all use electronic systems, don't allow it. So read the questions, answer the questions, stick to answering the questions, don't embellish it, answer the question, and submit your bid in plenty of time. Is the most advice I would give to people. So read it, answer it, and submit it in loads of time.
Yes, and I think that's a very, very valid point, and probably one of the biggest things that we see coming through the programme is people understanding, about answering that question, the importance of that, and the timing, and doing as much as possible in advance to prepare. You can create your tender libraries, you can get your documents, you can get your house in order to do that, you can update your profile. So we're just winding down here, and I'd really like to thank our panel for helping out today and answering all these questions. We will be reproducing these questions as an FAQ after this, so you will be able to see some of the questions and answers. And obviously, as a programme, we deliver training, and you're able to attend our many webinars where all our experts are on hand, and you can ask them those questions. In fact, tomorrow we have an ESPD and tender procedures running as a webinar. So if you haven't already booked on that, you might well want to consider it. And you can certainly post some questions at that webinar. Meanwhile, I would like to invite you just to spend some time browsing through the stands at the Meet the Buyer event today and having a look at the chat and the meeting hub. And thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, panel.
Okay, no, thank you.
You're welcome.